Okay. Hello everyone. I hope my voice is audible. 2 seconds. Yeah, I do see that no one has joined today also. It's fine. So that's the last lecture. And I'm Jagriti. I'm a PMRF TA for this course, Techniques of Material Characterization. And what we'll be looking at today is last week what we saw was on structure factor of an atom. How do you derive the calculations with respect to bits? Majority of the things were how do you see different types of crystals? So if it was FCC, it was a body centered, a face centered, body wise, all those things. And with respect to it, if there are different chemicals or compositions to it, how do you find their own structures? Okay, I guess my net is a little bit slow here. Yeah. So we saw the structure factor calculations like based on the particular geometry. You first should know basic trigonometry into it, the Euler's law, and after Euler's law, we saw that okay, if it was different type of crystal that was being given to you, a simple crystal, then if it was a body centered crystal, a base centered crystal, how your patterns would be affected for the same. So the XRT diffraction factors as well as your each atom which was placed at the corners, those factors. Right. Now, based on these calculations, we can find that which particular peak of your phenom which particular peak will correspond to which chemical equivalent of it, right? So if you know the spatial informations of it, based on the degree angles also, we can find that information. So everything here is based that now, let's say one such example of this FCC crystal. You knew that for a face-centered one, where all do you need? You need all corners, then you need on the bodily centers also, and then you have on two centers of the faces also. So in a way, if you compute like now this 8 will contribute 1 by 8 for each, so that's 1, and then 6 for each of the face centers of your bodies, and then on the corners of two on the centers of two faces. So in that way you have 4 here. So based on it, if you also see that if it's mixed and unmixed, then you see if it's an even and that's an odd. So accordingly, your distributions will change, right? So that was all for week 11. Now following week 12, you have about the working principles. Everything here also follows for X-ray diffraction. So if we start, there are different factors for temperature, absorption, and diffraction from the specimens. So how do you find? So there are even thermal vibrations. So there's a factor about temperature, how much intensity you give and for how much time. That also affects your measurements, right? So first, if you see the thermal vibration into the atoms will cause a very slight increase in the breadth of the peak. So your full width half maximum of your diffraction lines that will broaden up. So now if you have intensity to look at, the full width half maxima will always occur at half of the peak of your breadth of the waveform that you're looking at. But now if it's your amplitude that you're looking into, then it would be by square root. Now why you know that? Because intensity is always square part and your amplitude is square root of it. So that's why when you look for amplitudes, it's always V by root 2. Okay. Now this diffraction lines that you observe are very sharper up to the melting point and the maximum intensity will then slowly decrease gradually. Right. So the mean amplitude of this atomic vibration, that's not only the function of temperature, but it also depends on the elastic constants of the crystal that you're looking at. So at any given temperature, if you see, the less stiff the crystal, then the greater the vibration amplitude. This means that the amplitude is much greater for at one temperature for a softer and a low melting point material, like can be lesser for lead and with respect to that of tungsten. Okay. So there's also some scattering which affects when you have differences in temperature, when you have elements which get heated up very quickly and when there are, because now in both the cases your kinetic energy will vary and accordingly your diffraction, the XRD peak patterns will be broadened up. So besides decreasing the intensity in these, the vibrations will also have some general coherent scattering in all the directions, and that is here referred to as temperature diffuse scattering. So if you contribute to only the general background or pattern of it, the intensity will gradually increase as your angle increases, but intensity will decrease once your melting point is being reached out, and hence your full width half maximum will increase at that particular point. Now, this type of scattering, you cannot say that only follows Bragg scattering, which is like n lambda 2d sine theta. But in this way, what you can say that it follows at some non-Bragg angles which are greater than 2 theta, since the displacement for these atoms won't be at their mean positions, but they'll also constitute so something is like scattering in some anisotropic directions, which you can't actually say would be isotropic along the angle. So this leads to the partial breakdown of the conditions which are necessary for perfect destructive interference in between the rays which are scattered at some non-Bragg angles. Okay. Then you have the absorption factor. So this is a factor where you say that number by which the calculated intensity is allowed to allow for the absorption. This angle will depend on the geometry of the diffraction method that's involved, and relative absorption will increase as theta increases for a cylindrical specimen. Okay, and the incident beam is rapidly absorbed, and most of the diffracted beams will originate into a thin surface layer into the specimen. Right. So backward reflecting beams will undergo a very little absorption, whereas the forward one will have the whole specimen and are very greatly absorbed. The difference in between the lower and higher angles in reflections will increase as the linear absorption coefficient will decrease. So that is always greater for lower reflections. Of course, that we know that. As in how reflection increase, that will also decrease up. So as you have more number of intensity going back to your eventual source or your detector, the absorption that is happening at that particular surface or materials interface will also decrease in that way. And this factor is equals to is like inverse of the nature of your amplitude, and it's independent of the angle of the exact two opposing effects in this case. So these are like, yeah, some basic physics phenomena that you always see. So absorption will always occur at any case. The higher the coefficient of the specimen, the lower the intensity of the diffracted beams, and other things being equal. That you know that. Okay. Now, always this will now the temperature effect will decrease exponentially, and the amplitude of this absorption effect will depend on diffraction. If it's lesser, that's higher, and opposite in both ways, right? So, to first approximation, they cancel each other in this method, Debye method. I actually don't have much information of this method, but it's similar to how Bragg's effect occur, but it's at higher angles in this case. So it's even a fortunate circumstance that since both of these effects are being rather difficult to calculate exactly. Okay. And then there's diffraction from real. Okay, so how do you compute this full width half maxima? That's a good point. So yeah, if you look at here in this particular curve, you see that the intensity goes all the way up to 250 or 270, right? So if you want to look at your full width half maxima, that's a point where most of the intensity is like half of it. So in this case, since it's intensity, you can directly take half of the original amplitude, and that will be almost like 150 in this case. So across this point, if you see, that's nothing but your difference in wavelength that you are having across your full width half maxima. That's a width of your original cell volume that you are trying to calculate in this case. So now if your original peak position in an unstrung crystal is like this, when you have a homogeneously compressed one where all the properties aren't isotropic as of now, then you will have a shift in the position as you see in Doppler. And that shift will correspond to the broadening of your full width half maxima. In a way, giving you more wavelength information that you actually don't want, but now the scattering is also happening into more at higher angles. That means that your absorption is lesser into your crystals, right? So in this way, what you see is like you see more grainy structures. So their sharp diffraction won't occur, but it would be more broadband in this case. Now, how do you compute a full width half maxima? Similar is like your maximum intensity where it decreases by half of it. That's your internal breadth, and it's usually a function of your Bragg's angle. So this is the maximum value where your intensity curve peaks at. It's important for grain size and particle size calculation as well as your residual strain that you're trying to find. And it can also be fitted to a Gaussian or Gaussian Lorentzian function. So if you have any information about the background, the intensity that you're reflecting can be subtracted from that background, and if you fit it to a Gaussian function, you can have an information about the full width half maxima as well as the particle scattering that you have from the medium. Yeah. So when you look at these metrics, you always have a line broadening effect. So that is something which happens because of your instrumental errors. Now, no real particular, if you see real phenomena, never you see a monochromatic beam. Always you do have an effect of other components. So it's always more than one wavelengths that are being involved into it. But we always have an assumption that what we are looking at, something can be because of the coding, something can be because of the material through which we are trying to detect your sensor. But you, just like the elemental composition where your after your nucleus, the KH shell, and from the KH shell, the K alpha energy that you're trying to look at, that's the only range which has like the width of what's written over here, 0.001 1 angstrom. And in this particular range of wavelengths, you can never detect one elemental composition at it. So yeah, these kind of wavelengths are nothing but can be truly called as monochromatic, but you never have these effects. And when you're looking at these effects, you always get some line broadening effects. So since for every wavelength, you correspond to one line width for it. So that will also increase. And in that case, what's that being called is the spectral width of your line. So that the spectral width is directly proportional to tan theta and will become noticeable as your angle increases and as it approaches 90 degree. So when 2 theta approaches 90 degree, that means essentially your angle is 45. Okay. And yeah, so that's your parallel beam effect that we got the idealization of your Bragg's law. Following it, you have crystallite size effect and effect of strain. So yes, I guess this all is like following the same thing. So yeah, if you see in this case how your beam width is being determined, so width of your diffraction curve. So that will increase as the thickness of your crystal will decrease, right? Because the angular range from like 2 theta 1 to 2 theta 2 increases as your m value increases here. So if you want to calculate this width in this case, so that would be nothing but half of this particular b value. This width, your uh, broadening effect or your diffraction curves width. So you see this as nothing but differences in between both of them and half of the maximum intensity. That's it. Now you to cancel out two, so that's nothing but differences in between two spatial locations of your Bragg's angle. So that's the effect that you have, and it's always proportional to 2 sine theta. So when you look at, that's nothing but proportional to in between sine of two different angles, difference of both of them. So this is some Scher's formula which helps you compute the estimate size of the crystallites that you're measuring from this width of diffraction curve. So for that, you actually need this width of that you're trying to measure that you'll eventually get. And from there, you can make these estimates accordingly. I hope so. An effect of strain. So if you have something strained and unstrained, what two different effects that you'll see? You'll see some differences in between the periodicity, the dislocations, and the angular effects. Because of angular effects, you'll eventually have diffractions in there. So dislocations and subgrains, that would be another category of defect, which are like important consequences of this diffraction. Before the existence of this dislocations, what we usually have that will have an indirect evidence, which will show that all real crystals will possess a greater or lesser angle of a mosaic structure. So that means that it is anisotropic in that case. Now, crystal which is having a mosaic structure, it won't have all atoms which are like arranged periodically, right? So that would nothing but extend from one side of the crystal to another side. Now here, everything is broken apart. So everything is like into tiny bitty blocks here and there arranged. So those are all disoriented from each other. And the maximum size of this is like thousands of angstroms. So maximum angle will also increase. And because of that angle, the spatial locations that you're trying to look at won't be on the order of angstroms or the one wavelength or that monochromatic beam that you're trying to look at. Now here it becomes more crystal specific in this case. So when it is crystal specific, what you do look at to have some useful information from your structure that you're trying to image would be the parallel beam diffraction effect. So if you want a parallel beam diffraction effect for a monochromatic crystal, sorry, for a monochromatic beam for a single crystal, that will not only occur at one particular angle at incident theta, but will also occur at your Bragg's theta and your that shears angle. So those two angles that you're trying to look at. So from there, they have seen that it's supposed to tell you the density of the dislocations, how it's not uniform, how they tend to wall at each group in between them, and the subgrain structures, the boundaries surrounding smaller volumes and having a low dislocation intensity. So that information you can get from there. Okay. Hmm. And then there's the effect in between how amorphous and crystalline structures do vary. So I guess I don't need to go into these details. And I don't even see anyone joining. So you can just refer to this and let us know into the discussion forum if there are further questions. I'll just scroll through if there are some important points and I feel so that we should discuss those questions. Hmm. There's something here. Okay. Never mind. Yeah, then why do EBSD? So that was like what we essentially saw from previously from backscattered electrons. You get an information about the elemental composition. So the range of information that you get after doing this is like the crystal orientation, misorientation, grain size. But this eventually depends on the type of the scanning electron microscope that you're trying to use. So it eventually it needs to be an analytical one, or else the from the functional one you won't get this information. The ease of sample preparation from the bulk, the high-speed data acquisition, the access to a complementary information about microstructure. From the same specimen, you get information about its morphology, the orientation, and crystallographic nature. Everything can be characterized through it. So those information you can get if you do EBSD in that case. And orientation is important. Why? It will influence the way how your each and every element is being placed, or how your each and every atom is being placed within that planar surface that you're trying to see. And that will eventually affect all of your mechanical properties, the elastic modulus, the yielding strength, ductile strength, can be a fracture strength, fatigue strength, the stress and strain of your material, some electrical and magnetic properties that will eventually be affected because of the arrangement of these atoms in and such particular manner. There are these certain Kikuchi patterns which are like heart of this ABSD. So how it came through is like was the person, it is named after the person who invented it. It's like Shoji Nishikawa and then Shishi Kikuchi in 1928. So they somehow saw this cleavage structure of calcite, and from there they saw the backscattered structure of it at 20 kilo electron volt. Nowadays we go like much more higher at 50 and all. But here, so that they saw this diffraction pattern, and this particular pattern that you see is called as the Kikuchi pattern. The lines, so if you see, this is your specimen that you're trying to look at, and it's being tilted in a way that you get those diffracted beams. Now, if you have a detector at that particular angle, you detect those, and the way that the spherical, this coner volume that you get, this particular interface and that lines, that is being called as Kikuchi. Okay. So how it works? So this is your EBSD detector, this is your source gun, and this is where your sample is being placed. So at that particular angle where your specimen will get diffracted angle, so that's where your detector needs to be placed. So it's all automatically done. Okay. And nowadays in analytical SEMs, you also have an feature where you can directly see where your detector is going and what's happening into your sample chamber. So you have a camera and you can just lively, you get a feedback and you see through it. Okay. Those are some Kikuchi patterns and indexings for it. Yeah, you get such images from EBSTs, but all you need to know is those. I don't know if they have those graphs here, but you get graph through EBSD that these are certain K alpha energy lines that you have in the spectra with respect to the wavelength and energy of it. So how much energy and at which particular wavelength was it occurring. So you always have a prior information about your sample. Based on that prior information, you can always see that, okay, at this particular, this is the energy that you have that sample into. Something's bothering me. Yeah, so with that, it's all about EBST, and we have completed almost everything. Not everything, like I skipped in between. So those were the parts that were needed to know. So yeah, that's the last lecture. So quickly we can have a look at all the I know it's almost about time, but we can have not time, sorry. We still have 2 hours. We never go beyond 6 hours, 6:30 max. But we can have a look at the assignment questions and then we'll be done. I know most of the people joined for the first session, so the session is a bit hectic to join again and again. So I'll just go through them, and people who are free can have a look at it whenever they want to. So for X-ray diffraction pattern for an amorphous solid, it is characterized by what? So it is always characterized by a few broad maximas because you don't want a continuous broadband angle. So amorphous solids will lack the low range ordered structure which is found in the crystalline materials. Instead, their own atoms or molecules are arranged in a mu4 like a random fashion, and the lack of this long range order means that there are no well defined planes to diffract the X-rays very coherently. So instead, the scattering is more diffuse, resulting in a few broad maximas or humps in the diffraction pattern. Okay. Temperature diffuse scattering is most problematic for what? So it's more problematic for high angle peaks. Why? Because it possesses less intensity due to the atomic scattering factor plus the multiplicity factor. So the temperature factor will increase the background intensity, and this is due to the thermal vibrations of atoms, which will disrupt the perfect periodicity of the lattice crystal, leading to a loss of coherence in the scattered waves. Therefore, the effect is more prominent to decrease the peak diffraction intensity of the peak. Absorption factor of A theta in X-ray diffraction is primarily affected by what? So that's affected by the diffraction theta, that angle itself. So that's well obvious. So this angle that you look at where the absorption occurs at that one Bragg's angle will account for the attenuation of these X-rays as they pass through the sample. This will occur based on the thickness of your specimen and the diffraction angle at which it is passing through. The lesser the thicker the material, the more diffraction it passes through. More the thicker the material, higher the absorption, lesser diffraction. Okay, also depends on the path length that is being propagated. So that will eventually depend on your sample thickness. In Debye-Scherrer powder diffraction method, the absorption and temperature factors what? So they all oppose each other. Why do you know that? Because leading to a partial cancellation. So it will minimize the diffraction angle while the temperature factor also. Because temperature, you see those vibration, thermal vibration effects. So those will become more stronger in modifying the intensities as higher diffraction angles. But this leads to a partial cancellation of the two effects, simplifying the analysis of the relative peak intensities here. When you compare tungsten at the same temperature, a softer and lower melting point material like lead is expected to have what? So we just compared lead and tungsten now. So we see that, okay, so we see a greater amplitude of atomic vibrations in tungsten with respect, sorry, in lead with respect to that of tungsten. So we see that lead is more like a soft and low melting point material. So it will have weaker bonds and compared to a higher one with respect, that is tungsten. So weaker bonds will allow for a greater atomic vibrations at a given temperature, whereas the higher amplitude vibrations in lead will produce larger temperature factor, which will eventually reduce the intensity because of higher diffraction at the 2 theta angle of Bragg's. So compared to that of tungsten. If you have a periodic crystal or perfectly periodic crystal, and you have those, so your diffraction you no longer have there, so it's all absent at non-Bragg's angle. So it is primarily due to what? So if it's periodic, you don't have any destructive interference. So that is all because of the destructive interference of the scattered X-rays. Okay, because your diffraction peaks are now absent there, all effect to there. Which of the following defects would most likely cause a broadening of the diffraction peak in an XRD pattern? So, what broadens your the XRD peak? What broadens is the crystalline nature. If it's more amorphous, it won't. If it's more crystalline, it would. So, making your full width half maxima to broaden up. So that means that if you decrease the crystalline site or size of your crystalline sample, then your broadening effect will more increase in that case. Okay. Full width half maxima is a measure of what? So it's measure of the peak breadth that you look at. So it's half the intensity and measure of the peak breadth along your Bragg's angle. In powdered XRD pattern, the presence of a very broad and diffuse peak instead of very sharp peaks would may indicate that the sample is what? So in this case, we say that the sample is more amorphous and has a very smaller crystallite size. You have the Scherer's equation, and for what do you use it to determine? So it's used to determine the crystalline size in a particular polycrystalline sample. If you have a crystal with mosaic structure, that means some anisotropic is now being introduced, would be expected to have what? So it would be expected to have a higher integrated intensity of the diffracted beams compared to that of a perfect crystal. The broadening of this diffraction peaks due to small crystallite size is caused by what? Because of the incomplete diffraction interference of the scattered X-rays. If it would have been done, then everything would have been cancelled out. Okay. When a polycrystalline material is subjected to a uniform tensile stress, the diffraction beams will do what? They'll all shift to lower diffraction angles in that case. Okay. Regarding the relationship in between a microstrain and peak broadening, which of the following statements are true? So you see, higher the broader the peak, the more the microstrain that is being applied there. Broadening of diffraction peaks due to microstrain is primarily caused by what? So it's primarily caused by the variations in between interplanar spacing within the individual grains. Okay, I guess that's it. With that, we complete all the assignments and this week's session. That's it. Didn't take long because no one was here to make the session interactive. But if you have any questions further, you can let me know. I'm still active in the session. Teams will give me a notification if someone joins up. So for now, I'll close up the session. Thanks for having a look into, and thanks for this being hanging on till this 12-week course. Okay, thanks again. Bye. See you soon.